My name is Marilla Cushman. I am an Army veteran, served for 25 years. I didn't go to Vietnam. Thank you very much. And it is, I think Chuck has it. There you go. I didn't go to Vietnam. I did join the Army in 1972. I wanted to make a difference. And retired in 1997. But it's my privilege today to talk to my sisters in service. Theirs is a big story, an important story, one that that is really kind of invisible and hasn't been told. So we got a lot of stuff to cover. As I said, it's a big story and an important story. So we're going to try to tackle as much of it as we can. My colleagues here, this is former Army Major Karen King Johnson. She is served with Stars and Stripes in Vietnam. My Air Force colleague, Major Patra Frame, served in Thailand, and the chief of the bunch, all of us, is Colonel Pat Jernigan, retired Army. So I'm just going to jump in here real quick, and ask you what drew you to serve when you did? I mean, it wasn't a natural thing. Can you tell us, Karen, what drew you? I don't know if you're speaking or not. So.
I graduated from college like in 1964. And there weren't that many jobs, and the Navy offered me a position as a civilian reporter down in Corpus Christi, and then they said there was a hiring freeze on. So I joined the Army. Because there weren't that many jobs to get that I could work in newspapers.
I'm Petra Frame. I went in because I believe that we should have universal service in the country. I thought it then, I've thought it ever since, and so obviously if you think that, you have to do something. The debate for me was between the National Teachers Corps and the military, and the Air Force clearly won.
I'm Pat Jernigan. I was a history major in college, and as I looked around at jobs, it looked pretty slim. This is 1964. So I talked to the Army, and I actually ended up enlisting in the Navy, but 2 years later, I saw the light and changed over to the Army.
You know, that was a tough time. And certainly, you know, women didn't have the opportunity to go to ROTC or the service academies. Many of us were direct commission. When you went into the service, did you anticipate going to Vietnam, or did you volunteer? How did that happen?
I didn't volunteer when I joined. I spent 66, 67, and 68 in Germany as a CO of the WAC detachment, and got orders to come back to go to the Defense Information School in Fort Benjamin Harrison, Indiana. That should have been a clue. Went to the advanced class, and I'd been there 1 month and got orders for Vietnam. So, and no, I didn't volunteer to go to Vietnam, but I did volunteer to join the Army so they could do with you what they wanted to.
I volunteered. I had orders for Saigon. And in what tells you something about the time, I would have made the 10th woman line officer in Vietnam, and they were afraid of having that many women in country. So I got shipped over to Utapao in Thailand, which was a secret base with 12,000 people on it. You can imagine how secret that was, where the B-52s flew out of for the bombing runs, and the KC-135s refueled the other fighters.
I was assigned to headquarters, U.S. Army in Europe. My fiance had gone to Vietnam. Our big plans were to go to the career course together at Fort Holabird, Maryland. And the Army came out and said, we're going to send you to Korea. So the upshot of all of that was he volunteered for a second year in Vietnam, and I volunteered for a year in Vietnam. in order to volunteer, I had to certify that I was not the sole surviving son, which I did with great alacrity.
So Pat, tell us what you did. What was your specialty in the Army? What did you do in Vietnam?
Well, my specialty was counterintelligence. I was actually assigned in Vietnam to the S3, and my responsibility was reading, reviewing, and passing on intelligence reports that had been done in the field. After about 6 months, a job opened up at MACV headquarters, and I absolutely jumped at the chance. I had been working in a windowless building that had no air conditioning and smelled like an old gym. MACV had air conditioning and ladies' rooms.
How about you, Patra?
I started out in Bangkok, and I went on base for my first day after I'd gotten there late the night before. And that morning, they arrested the NCOIC of the unit I was going to run for treason and espionage. As far as I know, he's probably still in Leavenworth if he's alive. So that was a wonderful start for that sort of thing. So that whole unit was under a lot of pressure because of that, obviously enough. And they moved me 6 weeks later down to Utapao. And in Utapao, what I went there for was as a personnel officer. But the commander was talking to me about something totally else and asked if I'd like to be a protocol officer, career broadening, all that wonderful stuff. Let me let you in on the secret for those of you who don't know it. Protocol work is advanced babysitting for, senior people. But it was a great year. I really did work with a lot of wonderful people and felt like a lot of what we were doing really mattered.
I was the command information officer for the United States Army Vietnam. We had 43 photographers. We were in the field every day taking hundreds and thousands of pictures of what you were doing. We had Stars and Stripes printed every day. We had to have all our pictures and copied down to Tan Son Nhut at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You, the wonderful taxpayers, paid $24,500 a day to fly a world chartered jet back to Tokyo, where we printed Stars and Stripes, which then left there at midnight, flew back, hit Cam Ranh Bay, overflew to Bangkok, and then came back to Saigon and up to Da Nang and dropped off. We got one free newspaper, Stars and Stripes, for every enlisted person, officer, and country. So we got 100,000 copies a day to distribute. They came in on pallets. We got them out on jeeps. We got them out on helicopters. We got them back on a deuce and a half, or any way that we could get those papers out. And our job was to make sure that everything you guys were doing there, that the whole world knew about.
So I'm going to jump back here just a little bit. Were you prepared to go to Vietnam? Did you have weapons training? What kind of training got you ready to serve in a combat zone?
In all their infinite wisdom, the United States Army sent me to Fort Benning, well known as the Benning School for Boys, and went off the 250-foot towers, went to the Magic Minute, fired the weapon. And remember, guys, when they set you down, they put this canvas out in front of you and had to field strip a M16, and then after you did it a couple of times, they blindfolded you so you could put it back together again, and then you had to get in the foxhole and fire it. I have a scar. I didn't put mine back together right. So I did have weapons training, and I did carry a weapon, and I had a 50 caliber in my Jeep with 1,000 rounds of ammunition at any given time because we were out all day long.
I didn't have any training at all. The Air Force didn't do training for girls. And fortunately, I already had my small arms expert marksmanship ribbons, so I suppose if I had to, I certainly could have. But no, we were not trained, not at all.
Same for me. I was in Heidelberg, and I asked about qualifications for going to Vietnam, and they just looked at me. Girls, we don't have anything. Once I got there, I was issued a .45, which of course I'd never never shot. I figured I could tie a string around it and twirl it around my head and probably do more damage than otherwise.
Yeah, I've heard, in talking with several of the women who were assigned there in '68 during TET, that, you know, they suddenly had to become soldiers, which, you know, it is beyond what we know today and what's, you know, the training that all of our service members get to go before they deploy. So what was your day like? Well, let's start first. So you left the United States in what uniform? And you landed in Bangkok or Saigon. Tell us about that. What was that like?
I had fingernail polish, earrings, and all the girly stuff because that's what I did. And I had on my, what we called cords, the seersucker suit, and black patent high heels. That was the last I saw of them for the next 20 months. I wore this fatigue shirt every day, and the jungle boots that everybody had, you know, and the boonie hat. And that's what we had out there unless you had your helmets on, in which case. But I landed at Tonsanut at 11 o'clock at night, and they opened the door, and there was no snorkel that came out from the airport, you know, that you had to get off the plane and walk up a half a mile to the airport, and then a bunch of guys, looked like a bunch of little ants, the Vietnamese scrambled into the belly of their airplane and threw all our bags off on those hand carts that they pushed around, like you see the old railroad stuff. Looked like a lesson out of history to get there. And the smell was just, I think everybody remembers that first smell when they opened the door. And a sergeant came on and said, all GS-14s and general officers could get off the plane now. Nobody got up. And then he said all GS-12s and field grade officers could get off the plane. Nobody got up. And then he said everybody else. And 250 of us got up. So we became the everybody else of Vietnam.
I was stationed in Duluth before I went over there. So in a February morning, I left Duluth in blues, in a big, huge coat, and so forth, and went out to San Diego to catch the plane the rest of the way, and got off in Bangkok in blues and, of course, in heels. But because I was in protocol work, I was in blues and heels for the rest of the time that I was there. Summer uniforms, at least, but you know, dress uniforms the whole time. Very different than many people, obviously.
Well, I flew from California, I guess it was McCord, I'm not sure I really remember, and I was in the Cords uniform, which was a nice little two-piece summer-type uniform. We landed in Anchorage, and we were all, of course, told to get off the plane while they refueled. Well, it's colder than you know what. This is now early December in Anchorage. Then we finally landed in Benoit. God knows how much longer later. It was a long trip. And I felt like I'd walked out into a sauna or an oven or something like that. It was just absolutely awful. Talk about feeling rumpled. I mean, it was really, really pretty awful. And I don't think I wore the cords again for a whole year.
So did they issue you, what are the fatigues? Is that how you changed your attire?
As soon as we got off the plane, we were basically, those of us who were new in country, we were sent into the issue point and issued uniforms. And for those of you who don't know it, women at that time wore slacks, cotton slacks basically, that buttoned along the sides. And those things were just a real pain in the neck. So, oh yeah, and men's boots. Thank you, they don't fit women.
So where did you live? Where were you quartered? What were your quarters like? Were you in a barracks? Was it How did you live?
We didn't have barracks Vietnam, guys. We all know we had hooches.
So tell us about that.
I was, the hooches were usually 40 man or 32 man, depending on your rank, and the bathrooms were down the center, and you kind of had to fight the monkeys for the shower. Take cans of green beans in, otherwise you shared your shower with a tribe of monkeys, and those suckers had big teeth. But like I said, we called them hooches. They were like 2x4s, kind of with screened in windows. They were not air conditioned, right? I don't remember any air conditioning in Vietnam. And when I got off and I went to a clothing issue, they issued me 5 pair of OD underwear, for the boxer shorts. And I asked them what I should do with those, and they said, shine my shoes. I said, I was just told I'm not supposed to shine my shoes because the Viet Cong might see us coming. So they said, well, do whatever you wish with them, but you can't give them back. So, we tried to use dust rags for them and stuff like that, but I had no idea. But they weren't prepared to have women over, that was for sure.
I lived on the 3rd floor of a concrete barracks. And all of the women on my base lived on the 3rd floor. All of the women being 1 other woman line officer and 4 women nurses. So we all lived on the 3rd floor of the barracks. It was a little room, quite cozy. No air conditioning, although you could buy an air conditioner if you wanted to. Really, and there was a bathroom at the end of the corridor, all outdoor corridors, obviously enough.
I lived in a BOQ in Saigon. It was right outside of Tan Son Nhut, across from the JGS compound and next to the 3rd Field Hospital. Lived in a single room. I had an air conditioner, which I purchased and then sold, of course. There were a lot of people waiting in line to pick it up as soon as I was willing to let it go. But small room, not much else to say.
So what was your typical day?
Everybody worked a minimum of a 12-hour shift, and our office ran 24/7. We had 7 in the morning to 7 at night, and then 7 at night till 7 in the morning to get those newspapers out. We put out all the magazines for like the 101st to 25th. All those came through us because somebody had to pay for them, and I had all the money. So I got to make the decisions on what got printed for the 1st Cav, for the 25th, for the 18th Engineer Brigade, all this other stuff, and then we'd send their papers out or their magazines out to Japan to get printed and bring those back. And so we were busy all day long dealing with either getting pictures down to Stars and Stripes, getting the Stars and Stripes out, getting the other unit publications out, and then we had 6 Stars and Stripes bookstores in Vietnam. Maybe somebody did ever see them, and they had ice cream machines in them, and they always broke. And the only person that seemed to know how to fix it was someone who had a bobby pin. And for 3 years, I was known as Captain Ice Cream because I could fix those doggone machines by cleaning them out and sticking a bobby pin down in there and getting it done. But we brought over all the Playboy magazines, everything that you could go into the Stars and Stripes bookstore, you could get some candy or soda pop, and they were run by our South Korean buddies who came in as civilians and worked our stores for us.
My day started usually at 5 a.m. with a call patched through from the pilot of the first incoming rotator. That one was usually from the U.S., telling me whether or not there was anybody important enough that needed services, in essence. And then a typical day was that we would have a number of different people coming through. Some of them were military, senior level military. Some of them were senior level civil servants. And periodically a congressman or 2. And my role was pretty simple. It was to keep them happy, get them to the assigned half of a small trailer that they were going to stay in overnight, and make sure their schedule happened. They had transportation, all that sort of basic and boring stuff. And the day could end anywhere because we had planes coming and going all day. We had people coming and going all day. So some days it was probably done by 7, and some days it was done by 10 or 11. And in between, you know, you're taking them around and doing things. I will say the most exciting of all of these groups that came through was there was a SCENE group, so it was all the high-level military people from all the member countries, and they came down from Bangkok for a half a day with us to see what the war looked like from here. And I had an Australian general, and after the generals had all seen the military police do their things with the dogs, because we had dogs that were trained to kill for the exterior parts of the base. And so, you know, they demonstrated them. The Australian general wanted to do the same thing. He thought it would look good fun to have this happen. So after I talked to his ambassador and our ambassador and 9,000 other people, he was adamant that he was going to do this, and our ambassador was equally adamant that he was not, because they didn't want a, you know, foreigner dying on our base because he was trying to see what a dog that could kill you would do to him. We eventually got it, and he, you know, got all gussied up, put on all the proper stuff, and the poor airman whose dog this was like, you know, praying. You could see him. I mean, he was praying, please don't let anything happen, please don't let anything happen. But the Australian general, you know, he tried it, and the dog took him down right away, and he gets up, and he says, wow, what good fun. We should do that again. I said, okay, no, once was enough. But you had those kind of, in the middle of craziness, those kind of really fun moments. And then every once in a while you had, you know, the really not at all fun moments. And the days were busy. The people I worked with were all dedicated and terrific. So I made their lives a little easier, and I was happy to do it.
I don't have any stories that exciting to tell. We worked 12-hour days, 7 days a week. I think it was 6 to 6. We used to take a couple hours midday, and we could walk to the swimming pool, which was great, have a little exercise, have some Black Label beer, and if you were there, you know that Black Label beer was absolutely god-awful, along with a hot dog for lunch. In those days, we could drink, too, for lunch. In the evening, we'd go back to the quarters and have dinner over, I think it was BOQ3 next door. Sundays were really exciting because we could go to the Air Force Officers Club to their brunch. And they had all kinds of fountains that dispensed alcoholic beverages. So that was another highlight. It was just handle the day-to-day chores. They were mostly administrative and papers and reports. Not a lot of excitement.
So did you feel that what you did was important, that it contributed to the war effort, to the service members that you served with?
Out of the 43 reporters we had there at any given time, we enlisted men, E4. One of them came back and became the editor of Sports Illustrated. Several others went on and had really great careers. And we still talk. We all still get together. There's quite a few of us that somehow we're still alive. 2 of my reporters are on the wall. They were writing APCs. They were embedded with units out writing places with the engineers, and got hit by rockets. The other thing is helicopters had to crash every day or so. That took us down. But I didn't know anyone there that was not all for each other. No one talked politics. No one talked about whether the war was worth it. No one talked about what was going on. I didn't have a TV, so I couldn't really see what they were saying back in the United States. I knew when it was bad because I got my butt chewed. Because one of my jobs was also to escort people like Walter Cronkite and Morley Safer. We had to We had 750 foreign correspondents in Saigon, and they wanted to go out because they want to see people shooting at each other. And they're like, why? I don't want to see that. But we had to take them out. We had to do a press briefing every day at 4 o'clock. They called it the 4 o'clock follies because most of the time all I could stand up and say is I can neither confirm or deny that there are nuclear weapons in Vietnam. There is no division in Vietnam known as the Trosa-Cali Division. We are not, we did not suffer, losses yesterday above 75%. It was, they just, had all sorts of questions that basically was difficult to answer because if I'd ever told it the way that they wanted to hear it, I wouldn't have a head today. The Pentagon would have been on my butt for letting them do it.
I don't think of my own work as that much contributory to the war. What I think of it as is kind of just helping make people who were usually running the war have a good experience. When they came there, everything was easy for them. Somebody remembered to send them the shoes they left, and so on. But I worked with such a great group of senior officers, and frankly, there were very few women in the Air Force then, other than the nurses. There were very few women anywhere on any base. So every day when I would go down to the post office to pick up my mail, everybody who worked in the post office would talk to me because I was an American female. If I called over to Saigon, it might be a 10-minute call, hour and a half guaranteed because I talked to the guys at all the switches. So that part of it always reminded me of the importance of what was going on in terms of the human piece of it. And that was probably some of the most fun that I had was the human piece of it because, a lot of these guys were away from families. I knew all about their children. I knew all about everything because they just needed to talk to somebody. So that's the part that I probably feel is my contribution, not quite to the war, but as you said, to each other, to the folks we work together with.
I would echo a lot of that. I worked with a great group of people at Headquarters MACV. We supported one another. We were interested in everybody doing the best they could. There were actually 2 women in the division, which was pretty unusual. We were good friends for the rest of at least the other lady's life. And it was just to try and get through it the best way we could, do the job that needed to be done, support to the best of our ability. We were glad to be there. We were glad to go home, and we did our job as best we could.
What did you do for recreation?
My job was a little bit different. The people stayed in one place. When you were a photographer, we were all over the countryside, and the guys always gave us a beer. At night, we would spend your taxpayers' dollars to go out to fire support bases where the guys didn't. We wouldn't send the donut dollies or the special services. It was too dangerous. So my guys got together. Somebody had a guitar. Somebody had a trombone. I got my boonie hat and put a price tag on it, did mini Pearl invitation, and we would fire up those choppers about 7 o'clock at night and go out to any place where the guys didn't have entertainment, weren't going to get it. And I know my voice was bad, but they seemed to like the mini Pearl conversation, and they had beer. So we all did a little show, and then we got back, and the choppers went back. I'm sure the taxpayers only paid $50,000 or $60,000 for that chopper fuel. And JP5 was expensive.
Mine were a lot quieter. I mostly would go back to my room and read. I love to read anyway, and that was the easiest thing one could do. There obviously wasn't television and other things. So that was mostly what I would do, write a few letters, that kind of thing.
Recreation was pretty limited. Of course, after a 12-hour day, you were pretty well bushed. So, again, reading, recreational activities. If we could get R&R, we had a week in, I think it was 5 days in Bangkok. My husband and I got to go together. That was really, really great. We were taken aside when we got to Bangkok because they were giving the guys a VD lecture and telling them how to stay safe. They took us in an air-conditioned room and gave us beer, so that was really, really great. We also took the opportunity to take 2 weeks leave in Hong Kong and had a wonderful time, spent every nickel we could get our hands on audio equipment and cameras and clothing. But as far as day-to-day recreation, I can't say we did much of anything.
So you were given an opportunity for R&R. You had a break in service. What did you do, Karen?
Every 6 months in Vietnam, you could qualify for an R&R. The first one I took, I went to Australia. We went to Sydney and played with the koala bears and did boomerang lessons and went up the Green River. And because I was in country 20 months, the next time I went on an R&R, I went to Hong Kong because all my guys wanted brand new camera equipment, and the Navy had a huge BX down in Hong Kong that we could get to, that the Navy had all the latest equipment in. And I bought equipment for all the guys and discovered that they had some of the best Chinese food in the world in Hong Kong. And the third one, I got to go to Bangkok and discovered those little green peppers that they tell you hot, and I said I could eat them because I was from Texas. I was wrong.
Everybody has that problem in Thailand. I had a week off, and I went to Hong Kong for much of it. Had a wonderful time. Fortunately for me, my father had a good friend that was running part of a factory for his company. And so I got to go out and eat with the locals. They made sure I'm on a floating boat, and we're picking out all the food by looking at it and telling them which one you wanted. And then they take it out of the water and cook it. But they made a big deal because Nixon had just been in China, so I had to have Peking duck. And the best thing these guys told me, they were wonderful people, but the best thing they told me was the number of spots on the tablecloth is a tribute to the chef. And when you're eating with chopsticks and you're eating Peking duck, it's a good thing to know.
The restaurants in Hong Kong were absolutely terrific. There was a particular French restaurant, I can't pronounce the name, but they had the best French onion soup I've ever had in my life. I've never had any as good as that, and I'd love to go back and find the place and have some more soup.
Just a bit of a sensitive subject. Did you feel safe? Did you feel safe with your fellow soldiers or airmen? There's always an issue of allegations of sexual harassment and things that went on. Were you safe? Did you feel safe? Were your brothers take care of you?
I've talked to a lot of women nurses, and they've told me some really horror stories about being abused by their bosses, et cetera. And I said something to my husband. I go like, I never felt that way in Vietnam. I never felt unsafe. And he says, men may be a little strange, but we're not stupid. He says, you were wearing a 45 web gear, you had a 38 pistol, and you had a 50 caliber machine gun in your Jeep. Who would ever think about picking on you?
I actually never felt unsafe either. However, I have to tell you, if I had a nickel for every middle-aged married man who was damn sure that I was going to jump in his bed if he even winked at me, I would have been a Elon Musk long ago. And I had my ways of stopping that pretty quickly, which of course meant I was a lesbian.
Well, one of the reasons I really liked MACV was because I was working with a bunch of gentlemen. They were just wonderful people. It was a brother and sister kind of a thing. We all pulled together. I can't say the same for 525, and I'll just leave it at that.
So one last question. Were you proud of your service?
You know, all my guys over there, we were shooting Nikons. We're not shooting M16s because if you guys were shooting your M16, my guys were shooting their Nikon to get your picture to send it back. And to this day, they all feel, that they didn't do their fair share, that they were rimps. I'm not going to say that out loud, but we all know what a rimp is, and that they didn't contribute. And I pointed out to them that, we were out taking pictures every day. We were delivering 100,000 copies of Stars and Stripes every day. We ran the Stars and Stripes bookstores so they could at least get a Playboy magazine or something else like this. And I never talked to a troop that did not tell me that they appreciated having Stars and Stripes with a pin-up in it and the crossword puzzle. I'm going not all of it is shooting at someone. Some of it is we got to take care of the guys who were doing the shooting. That's exhausting when they were out there overnight, and sometimes the choppers couldn't come in. They didn't get hot food, and they didn't get clean clothes, and their boots were worn down to the nub. And just the least little thing that we could do to help them, that was our job, to go out there and try to help. And the same way with the Red Cross workers and the special service people. And when the Bob Hope shows would come over, we'd bring 25,000 troops in and put them down so they could see Ann Margaret. But just any little thing we could do to help. But, the Army talks about a tooth-to-tail ratio just to keep one guy in the field. It took 7 of us, back there getting them ammunition, getting them their POL supplies, getting them clothes. And I'll tell you what, nobody in Vietnam ever starved to death. We either got UC rations or we may have been throwing it out of a helicopter while hovering, but you got something to eat. So there was, for every one of you guys out there were really, on the front lines, there were 7 of us back there trying to make your life just a little bit easier. So, yeah, I'm real proud of my guys.
I've always been proud of my service. My mother wanted her priest to say a mass for the dead when I told her I was going into the military. My sister was a big protester at the University of Wisconsin while I was stationed over there. But I never felt that people didn't respond well to the uniform. I always traveled in uniform. There were 1,000,006 men from World War II that were the taxi drivers and the people at the airport and all of those who, long before it became the current popularity, were always saying, wow, when I was in the service, and thank you for serving, and things like that. I always have been proud of my service. That was my contribution to my country.
I'm certainly proud of my service as well. I'm really proud and pleased that I had the opportunity to go to Vietnam. It was an experience that I will certainly never forget. And I am so thrilled and excited to see the young people who are serving today, because there's so many things that they can do that we couldn't do, and it's just really impressive. It's wonderful to see how they've gotten along.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories. And we are all, of course, enormously proud of your service, of your trailblazing efforts, of the things that you supported for our freedoms to make this country a different place, and for the paths that you plowed for all of the young people, but particularly the women who are serving today. So thank you very, very much. Thank you for your time today, and I'm proud to be your sister in service. Thank you.